Giant robot, use atomic mega punch. I loved that show as a kid. That and last week's Ultraman and Speed Racer and Lost in Space. You get the idea. The missus and I were up late the other night. We don't watch TV when we're up late. We're usually doing something productive, but just couldn't get off the couch and channel surfed through, and the pilot episode of Lost in Space came on. Man, what I wouldn't give for that set. Not the spaceship, but mission control. Wow, what a set. I don't know if they built it for that or what, but holy Hannah. Hey, okay, enough down Alzheimer's lane. Sorry about that if you have Alzheimer's or if you're insulted by it. We're not a politically correct show. But we are ADRAMADA, another Dave Rush Ask Me Anything digital alchemy, and we get together once a week, every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time, where I am located in Southwest Houston, Southwest Texas, Houston. And I am Dave Rush. So mentioned in the title, I am your tech from Texas. And we're here because we love to tech talk, and perhaps talk tech. We love it. And there's always something new. There's always something interesting. There's always something exciting. There's always something that somebody knows that I don't know, and am fascinated to hear about it. And hopefully vice versa. I'd like to share some thoughts with you. So if you're watching this on archive, this was shot on Thursday. Did I say Tuesday? It's Thursday. We do this on Thursdays. September 21st of 2023. And I don't know if you know this. It's one of the important historical days in history. September 21st every year is Earth, Wind, and Fire Day. I know that means so much to those of you who are, I don't know, under 40. Saturday is another fascinating day. It is the autumnal equinox, 2 days from today. One of two moments in the year when the sun is exactly above the equator, and day and night are of equal length. And according to the astronomical definition of seasons, the autumnal equinox also marks the beginning of fall, or autumn if you prefer. So, eep, op, ork, we're here, we're tech, we're having fun. Man, do I have an interesting show. I hope it's interesting for you. You've seen some of my other shows and some of the other platforms. It's a little slide oriented. I've got slides for this one, but they're not just text slides. There's pictures and images and illustrations and things like that. So we will have some fun. Hey, if you're watching on the archive, if you are watching live and you haven't joined yet, I've updated the invitation so it's no longer messed up. I messed it up. We've got a Discord channel, and it is barely off the ground, handful of members, but we get together, we talk tech. There's a humor section. There's all kinds of stuff. Just go and explore it. The link is now posted in the chat, the ADRAMADA Discord server. Let's see, do I want to do that? Yeah, let's tease the show a little bit, and then we'll find out who's here. So after Johnny Sacco and Giant Robot and his Giant Robot, we're going to be talking about antenna technology today. This is a 2 semester long course that we're going to burn down in about 30 minutes. And what we want to do is learn enough about antennas to say, wow, I could take that information and improve my wireless connections, my Wi-Fi connections, my Bluetooth, my cell phone. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So we'll see if we can lay a little bit of that down. Well, let's see who has joined us. Not who's got jaundice or who's jaundiced. So, as ever and always, half an hour before showtime, Tullowit arrives and greets the day. And followed immediately by, at the beginning of showtime, Patricia Grace. Hello, Patricia Grace. Hi, Dave. Just got fiber installed yesterday. Wow. Congratulations. So, the first thing you did was run over to Ookla and said, speed test. And it's fiber, so I'm going to presume that it's symmetric, and I am going to make a blind guess and say gig up, gig down. So let me know how far off the mark I am on that, Patricia Grace. Thank you. Excuse me. My voice and throat are getting much better, but they're not done yet. So there we go. Let's see. Did I do a slide for this? I don't think I did. Let me look at my slideshow in advance. Oh, you foolish man. Foolish. Try this again. I did not do a slideshow for that. And that's okay. We'll just do this as news. I have some interesting tech news this week. I don't have a lot of tech news either, just some. So let's start with the first one that made it on my list. Unity, the game engine company. There's a lot of game engines out there. There's Unreal Engine and a variety of other ones, but Unity is an important game engine, and they are following suit. These large portal companies like X, formerly Twitter, has kind of pre-announced that they're not going to be a free service anymore. You're going to wind up paying. And Reddit, a month ago, announced to their developers that no free lunch anymore, especially for the heavy hitters, to access their API. They're going to be coughing up money. Well, Unity is joined the fair. And they announced last Tuesday, so it was actually a couple days before last week's show, but sometimes the news doesn't trickle down to me immediately. They will start charging developers for every game installation that uses the Unity engine. Wow! Pitchforks and torches storming the Unity castle. Because there's lots of questions about that. In their announcement, they said, including bootleg installations. And while everybody cares about, the real and how much money is this going to cost us as developers, how are you going to track bootleg installations, and how are you going to charge that to us? And why are we responsible for somebody who bootlegs and have to come up with some money? So, opening threshold for developers starts at $200,000, and studios may have to cough up 20 cents for every game install beyond whatever limit that 200,000 gets them in. And again, includes installs from pirated copies of the games. So you're all just gaga. Wait a minute. What games does Unity, what are the popular games of Unity? I spent this evening right after work making slides, and this was a slide I did not make, and I don't think I can get this up to you in time. So I would just do this. Go open up your favorite browser, look for 10 best games developed in Unity. So I got a couple of different. Oh, here, you know what? I have a link. Here's a link that documents every known game developed in Unity. There are 371 in the list of the link that I'm about to post. Here we go. See if that all fits on there. Sure does. It's only 143 characters. So that's a list of all the games, and I don't think I can get this top 10 list. Okay, but I can do a 3 at a time here. So here's a top 10 list ranked by, who did that? Screen Rant. A considered knowledgeable site amongst gamers for their opinions and posts and things like that. So there's 6 listed. Let's do the last 4 all on one thing. And I don't know if these are numbered 10 to 1 or 1 to 10. They're, well, Pokemon. I think I saw Pokemon Go in there. Yeah. And that's first one on the list. So that's got to be number 1 first. I have been planning for Halloween. I got to tell you what happened. The missus and I were out on Friday, and we were heading back home. We were 3 minutes from the house. We stopped off at a little store at the top of the subdivision to get one thing. And while we were in there, my missus' phone wonked. That's our term. Whenever it makes any kind of sound, it's a wonk. And she looks at her phone and says, "Oh, no." What? Well, we have a mowing crew. And they haven't had much to do. I've been sending them away for weeks because of no rain here. There's just nothing growing. But we got a couple nice rainstorms last week, and the grass exploded. So, okay, came into this thing. And he doesn't interact with us, unless we go out and talk to him or bring him money or something like that. But he sent a text message to the missus that said, "There's been an accident." And my wife started reading that out loud. I said, "What?" I didn't know it was from the mower. And what, is our kids okay? Whatever. I said, "No, the glass on our front door is broken." Okay. And so we finished in the store. We went back home, and sure enough, I had this big glass windowed screen door in front of my main glass door. And there was nothing but shards. We looked on the household camera and saw how it happened, and the guy's going to fix it. But there's still lots of shards left in it. And so years ago, I went to some closing hardware store sale, dumping off all their stuff, and I bought rolls of caution yellow tape for Halloween. Never used it, but I know where it is. And I thought, you know what? I don't want anybody getting cut up on this thing, or at least not without me saying I did do effort. It's not diligence, but you get the idea. So I put caution tape up in there, knowing that this is halfway through September, and that's going to be interpreted as the first steps of setting up Halloween. And sure enough, Amy's girlfriends came over last night to drag her out to dinner. And, "Are you setting up early for Halloween?" "No, look at the shards that continue to fall on the ground." So I have pictures of it. I won't post them. That leads to another thing. I am getting ready for Halloween. I got a good theme this year, but I was thinking about a new costume this year. So I've been online looking at equipment for just such a thing. And I found this. I resized this thing. It's a little bit out of scale, but you can see it's over on AliExpress. And if you do a search, go to aliexpress.com, do a search on digital mask. They have digital mask. And it's really kind of cool. You control the masks from choices on your phone. I presume that you can download or edit your own masks if you so chose. That's not it. I guess I just did one slide on this. I had 2 slides. What a cool concept. And the price, it's $40. If you're into masks and Halloween, as am I, that's pretty darn cool. I was on a site this morning, and how to describe this? There was information on that site that was the dot patterns used in Braille. Obviously, my screen is flat. I can't feel the dot patterns, and even if I could, I don't read Braille. But it struck me that there must surely be something that can visually interpret Braille. And so, my friends, I did a quick search and discovered this site. Here, I'll post the link. Yeah, go over here, post link. So this is a Braille to text site, and it does optical character recognition, figures out how many spaces are between the dots and things like that. It does it contextually. If you just put one thing up there with two dots on it vertical, it wouldn't know if there's one space or two spaces or three spaces. The Braille alphabet is done with two columns of three, so it's not real complicated. What is that? Touch base with you. Okay, that's for this weekend. So, anyways, I just copied that the Braille message that was on there, which you can see right here in the middle of the image, and I clicked the translate button, the blue bar in the middle of it all, and it said King of Hearts. So I thought that was pretty cool. There's an optical character reader and writer. You could create your own Braille messages and things like that. I thought it was pretty slick. All right, let's go back to message here. Rock. Did I say rock? I am. Here, stand by. I'm going to mute for a second here, just to see what the latest. You know what? Do I know how to mute this thing? Probably this way. And we're back. No crisis. All right, so let's go check and see who's. So I saw the rock thing. Glad you had it on hand. Yeah. Previous owner has several rock pebbles. Oh, okay. That was my initial assumption. I figured somebody threw a rock. And when we looked at the video, no. What was really amazing is it's a two-man crew. The owner of the company, and he always brings an assistant, and the assistant's job is to do the trimming and blow the trimmings wherever they blow them to collect them. And he walked up to the front porch with his blower and had it pointed down so that the air went underneath the screen doors, little gap there, and it pressurized between the real door and the screen door and just blasted the glass out. It's tempered glass, so it shattered into beautiful squares, little tiny squares, but they're still sharp. The changing mask is cool. I haven't decided whether or not I'm willing to part with $40 to get it. But if I'm going to do it, it's going to happen in the next 48 hours because shipping from China can take a couple weeks. We use the Dukesbury system in Braille class. Okay. My grandmother was blind, and she tried to teach us Braille when we were young children. She spoke German, and so we had to learn to speak German. And learning to speak German, we don't, not fluent by any stretch, but not only did you have to learn to speak German, but her goal was you had to be able to do the alphabet backward. So certainly forward followed by backward. And yeah, I think I could probably still do it, but I'm not going to do it for you here now. I'm responsible to what you're talking about in the chat, forgetting that you generally catch up with chat later. Sorry, no. Yeah, it was the blower. I bought a vacuum suck. I thought I was buying a blower / vacuum suck. I had this tree out back. It's called a live oak. It doesn't look like oaks you're used to. The leaves are pointed ovals, and they're only about an inch and a half long at most. They don't degrade. So I let them go for a couple of years, and last year I had a rake fest that took days and hurt for weeks. And we trimmed that tree this year, and it threw a bazillion more leaves. And I hate getting out there raking and stuffing them into bags. Back when I was a young person, we had this thing. It was a basket with big front wheels, kind of a triangular basket, and a brush that was operated when you pushed it. And so you push this thing on wheels, and it would brush the leaves into this canvas basket, and then you pour it into garbage bags or whatever, leaf bags. And that's not a thing down here. So I found I use Ryobi battery tools, and I said, I'll go get me a Ryobi blower, and maybe it's got reverse function. Well, it doesn't, and I didn't get a mower, but they have a sucker. So big, high-powered vacuum sucks out the leaves, runs them through a mulcher, and then into a big nylon bag or canvas bag. And they say it mulches enough leaves that if you didn't mulch them, it would fill 8 bags. I got my doubts. I haven't done it yet because we had some rain. I'm waiting for the leaves to dry. But next week, I will test my Ryobi vacuum suck leafer. Down a rabbit hole today. Somebody in our office asked a technical question. Hey, does anybody have an interpretation of what this means? And, you know, Michael Smyer and I immediately start racing to come up with answers. Michael has an answer off the top of his head. I thought there could, should, would be more to it. So I went out and dug up further. And I wound up down the rabbit holes that you would expect one to go down for such a thing. And in that process, I ran across this little tidbit of information. If you're in the U.S., you know what this is, Social Security number. If you're outside of the U.S., this is our prisoner tracking number. This is a number that they tie to every citizen in the United States that they're not supposed to. I'm going to go off on a political legal rant here, so let it go. But everybody has a Social Security number, and it controls your life, and it's how they track you, and so forth. And, you know, we get them when we're children, and there's some 9-digit number that everybody memorizes by the time they're 10 years old, and you use it for your entire life. And I always presumed, rightfully so, that there was a pattern to it, but there's much more to it. So you can see what I've got on the slide here. It's broken up into 3 chunks. The first 3 numbers are called the area. Second number is the group. And these are assigned sequentially by the organization that assigns these, the Social Security Administration. And then these are assigned in random order from 0001, 0000 is never given, through 9999. And so, you know, the first one to apply in group 45 in my example here will not get 0001. He or she will get some number, 2345. And then somebody else will get 5107 and 0015 and whatever the case may be. And they just keep marking off the ones that they've assigned until they run out, and then they increase the group number. So the serial number, the serial group, the serial batch, whatever, serial chunk, let's call it that, gets assigned randomly. And that's why if you've got 2 kids that you just had twins and you send in their forms to get Social Security numbers, they're not going to get sequential numbers. The current area is 773. And I don't know what the current group is, but let's say it's 45. So when they run out of 10,000 serials, then it'll be 77346 and another 10,000. And you can see, given the population growth in the United States, it's not going to be long, since an area is assigned sequentially, before we get to 999. And then what happens? Are we going to go to a 10? They won't go to a 10 digit. I know that in my heart of hearts because they're bureaucrats. They will probably add another 3 or 5 digits to the whole ball of wax. It's going to be interesting. Little luck, I won't be around for things when that happens. Moving along in my notes here. I don't want to do that. What comes up next? All right, that's show next. Oh, I renamed it and I renumbered it and I didn't reset it. That's all right. All right, back to see who's here and what the world is saying. Patricia Grace, because you didn't have to get one at birth years ago, my brother, sister, and I all have numbers, only 2 numbers different. They're 10, 11 years older than I. Wow. Oh, yeah, okay, so you did it later. Yeah, my sister and I have the same first 5 digits. Um, I think it's roughly true, and we were born 9 months apart. No, I don't know, 18 months apart, something like that. I was born somewhere in 63. She was born somewhere in 65. And her birthday is not today, early next week. I haven't got my sister a birthday present in years. You know, we're old people. We don't get each other presents. Maybe send a card, maybe make a phone call. But I ran into something interesting while I was poking around looking for T-shirts on AliExpress for the show, and I found T-shirts that were for her profession. And so I ordered a couple of them a little while back. They came in. I sent them to her, and they got in last night. And she's just having a hoot with those things. Tullowit knows the word. I always ask him, but this time I remembered, and I've used it enough now that I learned it. Mondegreen. Listening to a song that everybody here knows. If you're watching on the archive and you're 20 years old, you know this song. And I've known it since it came out, in 80... mid 80s, early 80s, from Fleetwood Mac, or from Stevie Nicks, Edge of 17. And you're singing it to yourself, and if you're not, just like the white-winged dove. Boy, that was terrible, wasn't it? It's not white-winged dove. And I asked my wife what she thought it was. And she didn't think it was white-winged dove. I thought, well, you're smarter than I am, which is always true. She said, no, it's, what'd she say? Wild-winged dove. Nope, we're all wrong. Anybody know, without looking it up, what kind of winged dove is featured in Edge of 17? Happy birthday, sis. I'll pass that along. Thank you. Hey, Jason Helms, good to see you. Thank you for the reshare and the repost. One-winged dove. Cool. Yes, you are, of course, as ever, musically are dead on correct. Just like a one-winged dove. I didn't know. It doesn't make sense now that I know. White-winged dove makes just a bazillion flavors more sense. You know, I went through the words. You know, I understand the point, but it's just not right. And while I was going down that road, something struck me, and I said, you know what, I got to share this. If you didn't already know this, hopefully everybody in the planet has seen and loves and feels that this is an art film. Airplane! Exclamation point. Love Airplane. Guilty pleasure movie all day long. Right up there with Galaxy Quest and a bazillion others. There are just memorable scenes in there, and one of them is when one of the flight attendants, they were called stewardesses then, was passing out coffee, and comes back and make a second round and says, would you like another cup of coffee? And the wife says, no, Jim won't. And he says, no, I think I will. And then, as an aside, he says, Jim never has a second cup of coffee at home. I got to thinking about that a couple of years ago, and it dawned on me. I remember that line from a commercial, and it's the same setup. What I didn't realize is it's the same actors. Jim and the missus are the same people, and I invite you to the following. This was from the 70s. This was from Yuban Coffee, Yuban. So I'm going to give you a link, as if you had nothing better to do than watch 1970s coffee commercials. So there's a link to the original 1970 commercial, and then here is the link to the scene in Airplane, and you will see it was you know, Airplane didn't come out long after the 70s, and so, or it was in the late 70s, I think. So they look the same. They're the same age and everything. I know. What does that have to do with anything? Nothing. This is the fun part of my show. This is what I do. So how are we doing here? It's 29, right on schedule. All right, so I'm ready to start project. Let's catch up on the last of the posts here, and then we're going to start talking about antennas. I have way more material here than I should, so I'll skip some, and we'll see how it goes. I'll get done on time. One way or the other, by hook or by crook, there will not be a part 2 if I don't finish, but I will get to the summary, so if we don't specify a particular point that I think is important for you to take advantage of, it'll be in the summary. All right, reading messages here. One Winged Dove. Patricia Grace didn't know. Of course I forgot it was Thursday. And dang, seriously, I have that on now. It's so good. It is just so good. Hey, all right, we want to talk about antenna technology. There's no math here. I will have some complicated looking physics and electronics chart. Don't worry, it'll be simple and easy, and there will be no test afterward, no math. So what we're talking about here today is how antennas work well. What's some technology of antennas? And whether you're talking your old FM radio or AM radio antenna or television antenna or your Wi-Fi antenna, the physics doesn't change. So I'll have examples up here of things that aren't Wi-Fi antennas, but just pretend they're bigger or smaller as appropriate. So what I want to show you first is we're talking about radio frequency, alternating frequencies that pass through air and walls and the vacuum of space. And the frequency tells us how fast the signal power goes up and goes down. We call that amplitude. And what's interesting about that is the faster they go, the distance that they travel over the course of one cycle. This graphic that I have right now on the 2.4 gigahertz is showing 1.5 cycles. It starts at the top amplitude, goes down to the bottom amplitude, goes back to the top amplitude. If it stopped right there, it would be one cycle. And it would take 1/2.4 billionths of a second for that to happen. Well, if we measured those points from the start of the top on the left side of 2.4 gigahertz to the start of the top or the end of the top in the middle of the page, that would be a simple, consistent distance. And wavelengths and frequencies are linear. So if we double 2.4 gigahertz to 5 gigahertz, the 5 gigahertz signal is half the length of a 2.4 gigahertz. It's twice as fast. It's half the length. And so the first thing we're going to care about here is the higher the frequency, the shorter the wave is, the length of the wave. We call that wavelength. What a surprise. Back to head. All right. So sometimes things are, well, it's not sometimes. Wavelengths in the language of electronics professionals and radio frequency professionals and so forth are always thought of in meters. And when we start getting really high frequencies and super high frequencies and ultra high frequencies and so forth, they're centimeters. So I'm just going to throw some numbers out here that aren't going to mean much to you. But if I got a signal that's running at 7 megahertz, 7 million cycles per second, the wavelength of that thing is 40 meters long. 54 megahertz, 6 meters long. 144 megahertz, 2 meters long. I mentioned all three of those because I got radios sitting in front of me here in my amateur radio area. It's called a ham shack. I run 7 megahertz and 54 megahertz and 144s and a lot of other frequencies. And I make antennas to work with those. And they're not 40 meters long and 6 meters long and 2 meters long. And that's going to matter to you in a couple of moments. 2.4 gigahertz wavelength is 12.5 centimeters from peak to peak or trough to trough. 5 gigahertz, about half that, 6 centimeters. I want to show you something that doesn't exist. That thing went on autoplay. At the middle of this graph is... That's weird. Hang on, let me turn off auto transition 8000. That says manual. Okay, well, we'll do it the old manual method. At the middle of this kind of donutty looking thing is a theoretical antenna called an isotropic antenna. It's a dot of infinitesimal dimensions. And this isn't actually a very accurate representation of it. The radiation pattern of an isotropic antenna is a sphere. It's a perfect sphere. And that means no matter how far away you are in any given direction, you can go that exact same distance in another direction, up, down, left, right, clockwise, counterclockwise, and you would see the same signal strength. And so we use that theoretical antenna to compare the behavior and transmission and reception characteristics of other antennas. And the most common antenna out there in the world is an antenna called a dipole. It's got two wires, two poles, and they are parallel with each other, and let's call it back to back to each other. So collectively they make a long line. And this is the radiation pattern of a dipole that's oriented vertically. So it's got this sideways donut shape. If we orient that antenna horizontally, it would look more like a tire. That donut would rotate up and down. And that's something that matters a lot to us that you may not have ever thought about. This is that same pattern just cut in a section. So I cut that donut in half and I'm looking down to it. My mouse doesn't show up on here. So what I want you to envision is a line starting on the left hand 90 of the circle and going to about the center, and then another line starting just to the right of center and going to the right hand 90. That is the two elements of a dipole, and these two circles that we're looking at are signal strength for any given distance. So you can see if you are perpendicular, if you are at the 0 or 180 points to this antenna, it's horizontal, and I don't know if it's horizontal or vertical in here. It's horizontal. You wouldn't get much signal power to whatever you were listening with. But if you were off to the sides of it at 90-degree angles to this circle, or maybe up at 60 degrees, maybe even up around 40, 45 degrees, you'd be getting some good signal. 90 would be the strongest. This is called a radiation pattern, and this kind of chart is called a Smith chart. So this is my dipole. One side is ground wire. The left side is a ground in this instance, and the right side is the transmit, the power wire. If we were using coaxial cable, this would come from the center wire. And the vertical part of this is all encased in some kind of grounded shield, so the signal can't escape there. And then those two wires pop out the top of that shielding. The left side is connected to the ground wire. The right side is connected to the power wire, the antenna lead. And this is a dipole. So if we were looking at that Smith chart, we would have to be looking at it side on, right here in the middle where our eyes are. We don't get much signal. If we were to turn this thing clockwise 90 degrees and have one of those ends pointing at us, then we would be getting very strong signal. And there's another more clear graphic of that theoretical antenna. And what I want you to get out of this thing is, if you ever want to make your own antennas, take a look at the space on the left side here, lower left, that says the total length of this thing in feet from very end to the two outside insulators. You can do by using this formula, 468 over the frequency in megahertz. If you want to do it in meters, it's 300 over the frequency in megahertz. And what I want you to notice, the label on the top of this graphic each of these two elements, the right side is the ground element. You can see that shield wire going to it. And the left side is the center conductor, the hot wire. And each of those two segments of wire is 1/4 of a wavelength. So if this is a 2.4 gigahertz antenna, end to end, it's 12.5 centimeters. That's for the whole wavelength. So this is a half wavelength antenna, which is very normal. So that's 6.25 centimeters. And therefore, each of these legs is 3 1/8 centimeters long, wide, if we want to look at it that way. What happens if you make it a little too short or a little too long? Just a little bit short, a lot bit short, a little long, a lot long. Well, what will happen is some of the signal will get to the end of the tip of the antenna wire, the radiators we call them, and they will reflect back into your transmission device, your Wi-Fi NIC, your router, your walkie-talkie, your Citizens Band radio, whatever you got. And we call the amount of power that's reflected back the standing wave ratio. And the ideal standing wave ratio means the antenna exactly and perfectly matches half wavelength. And we get a standing wave ratio in that instance of 1:1. But if we make it a little bit short or a little bit long, working up the left-hand side of here, the standing wave ratio starts to go up a little bit. So you can see on the left side scale, the first horizontal bar is 1.5. That's an SWR of 1.5 to 1. A little bit of power is being reflected back. In fact, this isn't a perfect antenna because we're not down to 1.1. If it was perfect, this thing would bottom out all the way at the bottom. A little bit longer, a little bit shorter, and we get 2 to 1. And you can see this is kind of a logarithmic scale. And what happens is when you get to a certain point, let's say you're near this top line, not quite the top line, at the 9 to 1, almost all the energy that you're putting into the antenna is being reflected back into the box that's generating that output. And when we get 10 to 1, nothing is getting actually transmitted out the antenna elements. They are just all getting bounced back. So we've got to have good lengths. And that's not possible, especially in Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi is a very, very, very wide range of frequencies. So they make an antenna that works just right at the middlemost frequency. But when you go from channel 6 to channel 7, you're sliding off the right-hand side of this chart. And channel 8 and 9 and 10. Now, it's never going to go as high as this chart goes. We may be looking at 3 or 4 to 1 across the entire range of 2.4 gigahertz. And there's magical things that they can do to help fix these problems. But that's why I want a perfect size antenna. Now I want to talk polarization. This is so important. This affects you every single day of your life. Signals come out of an antenna polarized in the direction of the elements, the driven element, the radiator element. So up on top, we've got horizontal polarization. I got another antenna down here at the bottom. It's vertically polarized. And what happens is, let's say we take that top antenna and we send it out and we listen to it with, maybe a wireless access point, and it has an antenna that's horizontally oriented as well. Man, they're going to love that. It's going to be a really nice, strong signal. But now let's take that same WAP and stick it in front of this vertically polarized antenna. That signal strength at the WAP is going to go way, way, way down, on the order of, worst case scenario, 30 dB. That's like 180th of the normal signal strength that would come out of there. Almost 1/200th the time. So there's your first important fact out of all this. In your wireless network interface card, if you've got an antenna that's adjustable, in your laptop, right, where that antenna is going up the sides of your screen, that's vertically oriented. And so you want your WAP antennas to be vertically oriented. Or if they're horizontally operated, then keep that lid wide open on your surface. When you lay your surface down on the table, now it's horizontally oriented. But it's going to change. Some people are going to be horizontal, some people are going to be vertical. You're right. Modern WAPs have between 4 and 8 antennas in there. Make a couple of them horizontal, make a couple of them vertical. Don't go 45s, by the way. It's something we used to advise. We don't advise that anymore. There is also an orientation, a polarization called circular polarization. And you can use circularly polarized antennas and get very good signals on the other end, on the receiving end, whether or not you use, you can see this RHCP and LHCP. Left hand circular polarization, right hand circular polarization. And I'll show you a circularly polarized antenna here in a second. But here's what I want you to know about this first. If you point that left hand antenna at the right hand antenna, they have opposite direction polarization. It's kind of like the same thing as doing vertical and horizontal 90 degrees out of phase. The signal strength becomes abysmal. So let me show you, hopefully, oh, there we go. I don't know if there's enough light here to pull this off. Yeah, I think there is. So we have a Yagi antenna here. I'm going to explain Yagis in a second. But right here is the driven element, the radiator, and it's circular. So I get the benefits of circular antennas, and I get the benefit of either horizontal or vertical orientation, polarization. Cool antenna. How are we doing time-wise here? We're halfway through time. I'm more than halfway through the slides. We'll call that a good thing. So what I just said is illustrated in this very fuzzy chart here. Up on top, in the top row, we've got a horizontally polarized antenna sending out a signal and being received by a horizontally polarized antenna. And you can see that the power voltage on the left side is roughly equal to the power voltage on the right side. There's going to be losses. Now let's take our transmitting antenna and make it vertical in the second row and let it get received by a horizontally oriented antenna, and very, very low, poor signal reception. And we use a circularly polarized transmitter here, horizontally polarized receiver in the bottom row, and not quite as strong as if it were truly horizontal. But that's a cool thing, yeah? Here's another Smith chart again. This is called the effective radiated power. Antennas can be designed in such a way that they will generate what's called gain. Gain is the apparent amplified output of RF energy from an antenna. And what we do to achieve gain is we add elements like in that Yagi antenna. I'll get into those in a second. But look what happens. I take all that energy that goes into the antenna, instead of it going out evenly in all directions or in a nice figure eight pattern, we're going to steal some of that energy from the sides and from the rear, and we're going to concentrate it out the front. And the front, therefore, is going to have a very strong signal compared to if we hadn't stolen some of that energy. It concentrates that energy in a single direction. That's gain. If you take the power, the actual power of the signal that's being delivered from your radio transmitter into the antenna, and you multiply it by the gain figure, that figure is measured in dB, decibels, then you get what's called the ERP, the effective radiated power. And it's a calculated number, and it's a roughly calculated number, but it's cool. So we care about effective radiated power in two flavors. One is for RF transmission. So here we take the actual output power And then we're going to lose some of that power going through wires and connectors until we get to the antenna. Then we get to the antenna. The antenna has some gain to it. So we add all that together. There's actually some multiplication here, and we get ERP. And it's the same formula, top and bottom. One is using terms and the other one is using numbers. So that's cool. So here is an emission pattern on a Smith chart of some directional antenna. And notice the red circle in here. The red circle illustrates the theoretical isotropic radiation pattern. And so that's what they always do when they design antennas and they test them. Let's put the actual measurements here of our antenna and compare what it would look like compared to an isotropic. And you can see in this particular antenna design, it's very, very powerful across out the top. And it's so weak out the bottom that it's only about halfway to what an isotropic antenna would do. No, you don't have to know the formulas on here. Same thing, just another view of it shown sideways, a little stronger off the back end called the lobes. Got a nice main lobe coming off the front end, and we got some not quite symmetrical lobes coming off the sides, which are illustrated as top and bottom on here. We call this power coming out the front side. It goes to that 0 degree right hand 3 o'clock position, and compare that to the power coming out the left side, the back of the antenna, and we give them a ratio. That's called the front to back ratio. Now, all we've been talking about here is transmit power. Receive power works kind of the same way. We call this the effective aperture. Gain antennas don't just increase the power to send out in a particular direction, but they increase their sensitivity to receive in that same direction. And the most powerful receivers we have, the biggest effective aperture antennas, are dish antennas, parabolic dish antennas. We have this whole bunch of energy coming from the top and the sides and the middle, and that all gets collected by the dish and then concentrated and reflected together into what's called the feed horn or the horn. So directional antennas not only increase your output power, effective radiated power, but they increase your receive sensitivity called the effective aperture. I want a big, powerful signal coming out of my wireless access point so I can hear it when I'm very far away. Well, here's an immutable law of physics. The farther away you get from the source of transmit power, the weaker the signal gets, and it gets weaker in the inverse square law. If I am 2 feet away and I measure the signal strength, and let's say I come up with a signal strength of 10, and then I double the distance from 2 feet away to 4 feet away, my signal strength 4 feet away isn't going to be half of 10. It's not going to be 5. It's going to be 1 over the square of the distance that I've moved. So 1 over 4. It's going to be a quarter what it was back at 2 feet. So a quarter of 10 is 2.5. So the farther away you get from an antenna, the weaker it gets more rapidly. It's an asymptotic chart. And what that means to us in practical terms is, A, the farther away you get, the worse your signal is. But it also means that if you double the output power of your transmission device, your wireless access point, instead of doing 100 milliwatts, you go 200 milliwatts, you won't have a twice as strong signal twice as far away. It'll only go up a little bit. So you got to go up the square of the distance to maintain even signal strength. I know it's a little confusing. We don't need to know that. Just wanted you to be exposed. 5 more slides and then a little bit of head talk and then we're done here. So there's all kinds of directional antennas out there. Wire dipoles are simple ones. Loops can give some pretty creative radiation patterns. Monopoles and Yagis, and I'm not going to go through all those things. Just some ideas. How about that straight up and down antenna that you have in the back of your computer coming out of the Wi-Fi NIC. Well, your usual stock Wi-Fi antenna is a half-wave dipole that gives you what's called 3 dBi. There's a little bit of gain in all directions. But if I make that the right amount longer, I can almost double the output power of that thing, the effective radiated power. And if I make it a little bit longer, the right amount, I can do that again, almost double it again. These coils here that you see in these antennas, especially that the one with 3 coils, those are filters. And what happens is they stop frequencies from passing through when they are above or below a certain value. And for that reason, I can make a dual band antenna. These antennas are 2.4 gigahertz down below the middle coil and other way around, above the middle coil, 5 gigahertz below the middle coil. That 5 gigahertz signal can't pass through that coil and get all the way to the top antenna, and that would be all kinds of weird wonky distances and wavelengths and things like that. A Yagi antenna. We're looking down on a Yagi antenna. The gray thing here in the middle is our radiating element, our driven element is sometimes called that. Behind it, a little bit longer than the antenna and attached to the ground feed is a reflector. So that's what's going to knock out signals from behind this antenna to the right of this antenna, and it's going to reflect any power that comes from the driven element toward the left. And then these D1, D2s, D3s, these are directors, and they are going to continue to focus the energy narrower and narrower and give it greater effective radiated power. So you saw my little handy dandy antenna here. It's got 1 reflector, 1 driven element, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 directors. Nice. Can I do better? Funny, I think I can. How about this one? 1 driven element, 1 reflector, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 more director. But it's got a tighter gain pattern. Beam width, they call that. And then how about my favorite one here? I got a circular, it's kind of rectangular. It's not actually circle, but I got a rectangular, circular radiating element here, driven element. I have 1 reflector. And by the way, sometimes they have more than 1 reflectors, and you'll sometimes see them kind of V-shaped like that. Bzz, 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 bzz. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 directors on this guy. This thing is a very narrow. So if I take my regular wireless access point and I say, hey, let me see how many WAPs you hear in this area, it's going to show me 10 or 12. If I hook this guy up into one of the antenna positions, and a little cable and a connector adapter, and point this, I get 60, 70, 80 as I go through the whole circle. I can go hit the Starbucks that's about 7 miles away with this thing. This is a patch antenna. A patch antenna has a little radiator, and then it has a square ground plane behind the radiator and another square director in front of it. So this thing really does this, this ground plane does a really, really great job about rejecting any signals coming in from the backside and trying to get out the backside, and it does a really nice job of focusing toward the front side. There's also there's holes in this green substrate. Sorry, brain fart on that. There we go. And those are called resonator cavities. All right, one more slide to show you here. This is a good pole-mounted vertical antenna, the lower one. If I take that antenna and I move it a little bit in the direction that it's pointing, and I mount it so the pole is directly behind this antenna, it's going to wipe out the rear transmission capabilities a little bit now and any rear reception. So mounting it off to the side like this is a pretty important thing. And that kind of makes sense here, right? And it's also going to wipe out the whole design radiation pattern. All right. That's everything about the tech side. So let's dive into here. So benefits of gain antennas and directional antennas. And we're going to run a hair long here. I'm right on the hour. Just give me about 3 or 4 minutes here to finish this thing up. And then we'll do, let's run 5 to 10 minutes over. We'll take any comments and questions and whatever. So benefits of directionality: strong front and okay side transmission and reception, very weak backside reception and transmission. Security: when you have directional antennas, you can govern the area that you want people to receive very well and an area where you don't want people to access. So maybe I've got this inside my building and it's pointed, from a corner wall toward the infrastructure inside my building. That keeps some people outside that wall from being able to easily hack my system. The higher the frequency, 5 gigahertz instead of 2.4 gigahertz, the greater the negative impact of obstacles. The potted plant, the drywall, the gypsum wall, all that stuff has a tougher time getting through when when we're using higher frequencies. So there is that one downside of using 5 gigahertz, but it's mostly outweighed by the benefits of using the much higher frequencies. Cables and connectors, they all introduce losses. So I don't want to go through a lot of different adapters. Here's an adapter, and here's an adapter that goes into that, and now I can get this into the end of my, whatever kind of device or cable or whatever. I've introduced a lot of loss with these things. So use one if you have to. Use good, high quality cable. The thicker, the better, more often than not. So if we were to summarize the whole thing, external antennas are available in high gain, omnidirectional. That's my dipole, that's 3 dB and 5 dB and 9 dB. And in directional antennas, my Yagis, my patches, my parabolic dishes, so forth. Directional antennas can increase effective radiated power and reception power in one direction at the cost of poor ERP and receiving power, effective aperture, off the sides and rear. In general, with Yagi antennas, the more directors and the more reflectors, the better. But they're not willy-nilly designed. They got to be the right distance away and the right length. And matching orientation is the most important thing that we can do as users every day to maximize our chat strength. Does that make sense? All right. Everything you wanted to know about antennas in 30 minutes, but we're afraid to ask. All right. Let's see what happened here in chat and quote. You said the thing about the one-winged dove the other day. I did. I said that elsewhere. I specifically didn't do that here. I said it for the show, but I do tease in other platforms. Stevie Nick says it's a white-winged dove, huh? All right. I'll call her. She's over at the house a lot. Jason, I used to tell people at the ISP I work at, 2.4 has a longer throw but weaker signal. 5, sure, okay. Yeah, I'll go for that. More often than not. Then there's the secret, magical, mystical world of amplifiers, but they're not technically legal in the U.S. Jason says to Patricia, made it easier for non-tech people to understand. Sure. I just wrap the antenna in aluminum foil. That's what I do. After I put the aluminum foil over my hat, then I wrap my antenna in it. Oh, wait, got to make sure the aliens, there it is, reading minds. Wait, never mind. Men on the router modem. All right, looks like an antenna off a house. Yeah, I have a real outdoor TV antenna here. I was a cord cutter many years ago, and I've got a regular TV antenna. I don't know, it's about 25, 30 feet, something like that. And man, television over years has gotten, the programming hasn't gotten any better. But the number of transmitters out there and stations is huge. I can get about 110 different channels on my regular television. I watch about 3. Football's on right now, by the way. And it's not on broadcast TV, so being a cord cutter, I will happily and gladly stream it. Hey, well, guys, we are wound up here. Thanks for hanging out with me a couple extra minutes. You know what? I'm going to be smart this time. I'm going to make sure that the show runs to its end. What a concept. And then I will kill the show. So let's just do our wind up, and I will sit here in foolish silence for a minute or so and let it run and have a good fair ending. So everybody, as ever and always, I wish you a great rest of the week. It's Thursday. There's not much left in it. I will be in Austin tomorrow night and all day Saturday. Back in town Sunday night. The missus is leaving town on Saturday, heading back to home to take care of the family crisis we talked about here a week ago. I may or may not be able to join her. We'll see how it goes. In that meantime, please take care of each other. Take serious steps to stay healthy, and if at all possible, call or visit your parents. And of course, never forget, technology is great, but the greatest resources we have are you and I. And with that, good night. I will see you on ADRAMADA next Thursday and on the other platforms that I'm on as well. And until then, remember, how you do anything is how you do everything. Eep, op, ork, ah, ah. And I'm going to do one final wave so I know when it happens on the delay. And then I can cut it off. It just started buffering. How did that happen? There we go. Okay.